listening to the great sounds of Binjang 91.5. It's Tony Graham here, and I've got in the studio Mathew Dickerson, and Allan Smith, both former mayors of the Dubbo Council, former Dubbo Council, and we're here today to talk about water and the water restrictions and allocations and everything that's involved with that, and the current council stance on all of this. So it's still morning, so good morning to both of you.
It's actually afternoon now, I think, Tony. I think we've just slipped past midday there.
I'm a little bit behind the time, aren't I?
That's right.
Yeah. And good morning, good afternoon, Tony.
Yes, thank you. Well, starting off with the current situation, Mathew, what would you like to say about the current council stance on the water restrictions, which started today, by the way?
Yeah, we're up to level 4 today.
Yeah.
And it seems quite ridiculous that there is a drought management plan. And if you go to the Dubbo Regional Council website and you go to their drought hub, you click on the drought management plan and it comes up and shows you a plan that's been put in place that went through a process. It went out to public so people could have a look at it, consult on it. The councillors at the time had feedback from the community. They went through a standard sort of process to plan and make sure you had the plan right before you then adopted that. So that was approved by council. That's still the plan that they're using now. And in fact, the CEO was recently quoted in the paper as talking about the use of soaker hoses was necessary because the drought management plan said that that's the way it should be. But in that plan, it's got some trigger points for when you should go to different levels of water restrictions. And that's sensible because the time to do planning for a drought is not when you're in the middle of a drought because you can be under stress and you don't make necessarily rational decisions at this point in time. And so the plan then said that we should be on no restrictions unless some certain trigger points happened. Level 1 trigger point was if you went to 70% of your river allocation or 50% of your bore allocation, that was enough to trigger level 1. Now at the moment, Dubbo as it stands is at 80% of our river allocation and 100% of our borefield allocation. So it's actually above level 1, but let's say you should go to level 1. Level 4 drops all the way down to 45% and 50%. So we're a long way above the trigger point for level 4. So there's no way we should be on level 4. Level 1, based on that document, based on the long-term planning of council, based on the fact they're still using that document, we should be on level 1, and that would be sensible and rational, and it wouldn't be having the negative impacts on our reputation and on the businesses in Dubbo that we are seeing already.
Yeah, and of course, all these trigger points and everything else is all based on science. Water engineers who know what the capacity is and how long water will last and what the appropriate points are. So this is not just something they pluck out of thin air.
Correct.
These drought management plans are put together in detail by engineers, then discussed and a plan worked out through the council as to how to apply this.
That's right, and there was actually...
And they're not applying the science of a drought to our area now, and that's costing businesses and ruining investment in the town in relation to gardens and the upkeep of the town itself. I notice there's quite a few council trees dying all over the place. That somewhere along the line they'll have to be replaced.
Well, Tony, can I just come in there and say that, and that's part of the amenity of your town and your city, as Wellington or Dubbo. Yes. In a drought, the well-being of your community is important.
Absolutely,
is important, and a lot of people come in to town to shop, to see a doctor, see some whatever, see a friend, have a social event that come from a very brown, dry background.
Yes.
And to see a bit of green actually lifts their well-being.
Yes.
And so it's not always about money.
No.
And it's not always about how people perceive your town as far as a business opportunity is concerned. Sometimes by keeping it a bit green, when people come into town that are feeling down, and at the present time they're saying that quite large numbers of people that are tied up with the land are suiciding. They come to town, they see a bit of green, they get relief from what they see day to day. And so it's important that we do have the capacity to at least keep our communities green.
And Allan, of course, you're going out with your family and helping out on the farm there, and you're speaking as somebody, not only just a former mayor of Dubbo, but somebody who's living the experience of the rural drought as it affects rural industry, and of course you have your town. So people seem to confuse the issue here about we must save water in town because of the people outside of town, but the two things are not necessarily related, one is a bit.
Well, large numbers of people that I know are dry land, they're not on the river.
Absolutely.
And by conserving water in Dubbo, doesn't put 1 litre of water in my family's dams or the tanks on their house. It doesn't put 1 litre of water out there for them. No. Not one. And for irrigators downstream that are irrigating from the river, they've already been turned off.
That's it.
They've already been turned off, so it doesn't help them at all.
No, it doesn't.
What's the point? But if it did, I'm sure people would have a slightly different view. But it doesn't help them in any shape or form by doing what they're doing in relation to these restrictions. And remember, Dubbo is a city that services the region.
Yes.
And if you and the region gets its services from Dubbo, and Dubbo also requires the region to be out there to make it a very much an economic powerhouse, which Dubbo really is in this area. But if you downgrade Dubbo and the Dubbo region, then you're downgrading the capacity of the region to attract people into the future and attract the services that this region needs.
And that benefits nobody.
Benefits nobody.
And the big question is, why are we doing this to ourselves? It's completely unnecessary. And
well, at the first, Dubbo, before the amalgamation, during a period that I was the mayor and then Greg Matthews was the mayor, we invested a very large amount of community money, it is community money at the end of the day, in upgrading our water filtration and our capacity to not only produce water for the community, but to store water for the community. That plant in Dubbo is able to produce about 80 megalitres per day, which is something like 20 odd gigalitres per year.
Probably 29 gigs a year.
Per year. Dubbo uses on average somewhere between 7 and 8 gigs total for the whole year. But we upgraded it on behalf of the community so that we can service the water needs. Now, the same process would I'm sure would be starting to take place here in Wellington.
Well, it's a blanket rule for here.
But at the end of the day, the water service or the water capacity of the community is the community's. Council is the community. And the work that was done to upgrade it to make sure we could deliver it was done on behalf of the community. And if you want to turn it into a business, on behalf of the shareholders. And who are the shareholders? Well, the residents of this community.
Still the same people.
Same people. Yeah. And so, as such, it needs to be taken into consideration what the community's needs are. And the community's needs are the plan that was put in place, the drought management plan, after the investment. A proper plan was put in place, not within a period of the drought, in a period where you can think properly through it, taking the best advice from, as we said, water engineers and from State Water or Water New South Wales, whatever they happen to call themselves this month, to deliver the best outcomes from that investment over a period of time as water either increases or diminishes. And if you've got good governance, then you should be following the plan. And if the plan isn't any good, then you should be changing it. But remember, this is a plan that is the community's plan, accepted by the community, and as such, if you're going to change it, you need to take the community with you and get the community's view in relation to the changes.
So, Allan, what makes you think the reason would be for this self-flagellating decision being made about water use in this town and in Dubbo?
Well, I think the capacity of council has been diminished over a period of time in relation to the professional staff. They do have good professional staff, have had good professional staff, do have good professional staff, but their capacity from where they were to now, I believe, has been diminished. That's my belief. And they now have management in the form of the CEO who comes from Sydney, and whether they're doing a good job or a bad job, I'm not going to draw conclusions on that. That's for everyone else to draw a conclusion. Yes. But let me say, in Sydney, the water is run by Sydney Water.
Yes.
You've got people there now.
Professional outfit, in other words.
You've got people there now that have no experience within urban water, especially in what I would class as regional urban water. Yeah. And I think that's telling. I think that's telling.
We'll be back in a moment, so we just have a few messages to get out there, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned to Binjang 91.5.
Binjang.
Well, you're back with Tony Graham here, and I've got Mathew Dickerson and Allan Smith, both former mayors of Dubbo, what was then Dubbo City Council, and we're discussing water here today because that's becoming a bit of a controversial subject. As a matter of fact, Mathew and Allan made a media release yesterday at 4:54 p.m. and Council responded to that. About an hour later, 5:26, they've obviously responded to this media release and what was in it, because on Monday they're having a meeting and they're going to revise the level 4 water conditions, or they're looking at revising that, and also a few other things about how they use water around the town as well. And
that seems interesting, Tony, because in the drought management plan that we've already spoken about, that went through a process and was approved by councillors and inspected and approved by the community, part of that was that there are no consistent water restriction definitions across the state, which seems ridiculous. Everyone thinks, well, surely a level 4 in one place means a level 4 in another place, but it doesn't. Everyone can make up their own.
Yes.
What the former Dubbo City Council did, which was quite sensible, was they formed an alliance with Orange and Bathurst called the BOD Alliance, Bathurst, Orange, Dubbo, and part of that alliance was to look at a range of things that we could do together, and definitions for different levels of water restrictions was part of that. So the level of water restrictions, level 4, level 2, whichever level it is, were consistent across Bathurst, Orange and Dubbo. Now the media release that came out from Council, as you say quite correctly after the media release that we put out, talks about changing some of those things, which to me just makes it more confusing rather than change the level 4 definitions, which have been agreed upon by 3 different communities. Rather than change those conditions, just change the level of water restriction. And that's really what we were trying to achieve with our media release, was to say the community's hurting by going to level 4, the damage to our city is being done, untold reputational damage is being done to our city, and if you look at the drought management plan, there's no need to go to those levels. And so now to go and just ad hoc, knee-jerk, change those definitions of level 4, it just seems like another decision on the run rather than making good long-term decisions with thought and with planning.
Well, looking at the proposed changes that they're saying they're going to be looking at for level 4, it kind of is looking at getting back to the same kind of conditions roughly as level 1. So it seems like a political move to roll it back after making a mistake without appearing to be doing so. That's the way I read it. It is good though that a council has woken up to the fact that there's a bit of a problem here and they need to do something about it. So I'm very glad this media release came out, and there is some pressure on council to revise what they've done, revise their decisions. And everybody makes bad decisions,
the sign of a good leader is that you can actually admit that you've made a mistake and then change course, change it. But in this case, they're trying to change the decision without admitting they made a mistake. It would be okay for council to come out and say, we think level 4 was too far, we've heard community feedback, we're going to take it back to level 1, that's a more reasonable level. And I think that would be much better for our reputation, for businesses. I mean, there are signs, there are 11 signs that they constructed around the outskirts of Dubbo that have got the various level restrictions on them. But the thing that disappointed me most about, apart from the waste of money of putting them up, is it says level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6, but there's nowhere on that sign that you can say no water restrictions. So when people drive into Dubbo forevermore, they'll see a sign that only talks about which level of water restriction, not that it's got no water restrictions. Surely that would have been something you're going to put on that sign.
And there's been interesting claims about council using grey water too, I believe.
Yeah, it's been a saga. They've put up a variety of signs, and the first phone call I got about it, Tony, I didn't believe the person. They rang me and said, there's grey water signs, and I went, well, it can't be. Council wouldn't have the volume of grey water, and you can't put grey water through sprinklers. There's certain rules about grey water. You've got to put it subsurface, it's got to be 100 mil under the surface.
And where's the plumbing for it?
Where's the plumbing for it? There was all these questions.
Massive plumbing is required for grey water.
Yeah, so
right throughout the city.
The person that rang me about it, I said, no, you made a mistake. It might say bore water, it might say recycled. No, it says grey water, he told me. Anyway, so finally I went for a drive down and had a look at it, and there were grey water signs everywhere.
Yes.
I started asking a few questions of council. I got some fairly harsh responses from some councillors, some very vitriolic responses from councillors, until finally, after they thought about it for a day or two, not councillors, but the official council Facebook page made a comment to say, actually, we're taking down all those grey water signs. We aren't using any grey water on our field. So it was a complete lie.
So they've been making a few great decisions by the look of it.
You only wanted to lead up to that line, didn't you, Tony?
Well, I hope they don't keep on making these great decisions because then it becomes a bit of a worry, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
And look, just getting back to the local scene here, I've been fairly close to lots of the councillors here over the years, and they've always said to me, look, Wellington has got a fairly large allocation, the township has got a fairly large allocation for town order, and that was one of the reasons why they were able to put the jails here, in fact. And there's still heaps left. There was just a huge amount that they had at their disposal. And so it begs the question, why are we on the same level of restrictions as Dubbo? It doesn't make sense. It's not a common sense decision. We know that there's huge reserves of water excuse me, under Wellington. Not only do we have the convergence of the two river valleys, the Bell and the Macquarie, but there's also all the groundwater and all the, there's wells every 50 metres up those rivers, and whilst we might not have a bore right now to be that would connect into the town system, it wouldn't take much because wherever you drill, you're going to get water. No. So there's a big question, why is Wellington being treated the same when we're not?
Yeah, I think really it's hard to know what goes on inside the mind of councillors and council at the moment.
I found it difficult.
Yeah, but I think the real answer to that is that council is probably not paying a lot of attention to Wellington. That's the impression that I get. One of the concerns that I had about the amalgamation at the beginning...
It's the impression everybody gets, by the way.
Yeah, look, I had a concern that said in a larger council, Wellington could quite easily lose their voice. And from my perspective, I was Dubbo Mayor at the time when the amalgamations were discussed. It was a twofold factor for me. One, I didn't believe the amalgamation would be good for Dubbo, but two, I couldn't see how it could possibly benefit Wellington. So your mayor at the time, Anne Jones, Anne and I both talked about it. We went and did some publicity around the fact that neither of us and neither of our communities wanted the amalgamation. But part of it was that Wellington would be forgotten about, and I think this is a scenario where the focus is on Dubbo. Both Allan and I are talking about Dubbo because we know Dubbo because we were there both in that same role in terms of Dubbo, so we understand the background and the data from Dubbo. I don't know that information for Wellington, and simply I don't think the council at the moment is really paying enough attention to all that data as well.
Yeah, and look, there's two. You mentioned two things here, but how well a council's run is one thing, and whether there's amalgamation or not is a completely different story. They're two separate things. I mean, a good council can make an amalgamation work, a bad one won't.
You're right.
At the end of the day, so they're not necessarily tied together. They aren't ultimately tied together once you do have the amalgamation, because, well, if the council's not local and it's making decisions that are bad for you, then obviously it's been a disadvantage for you. But really, on paper, you would expect amalgamation would bring benefits. And we're seeing a lot of those benefits initially now with money rolled out for the swimming pool and stuff like that, but the question is what happens when the money runs out.
And Alan, that was one of the things we talked about, wasn't it? There was a sugar hit.
Yeah, very much a sugar hit early in the piece. The state government wanted to make it all look as good as it could. Yeah. So there was a big sugar hit, 10 million here and a few million there and a few million here. But as you said, what happens when the sugar hit runs out, and then it all comes back to be as it usually is in local government, funded by local communities out there struggling to get more and more grants from government to make ends meet without hitting the community too hard in relation to the costs. Now, that time is coming, but the thing that's in my mind too is not having all the data. Is I'm wondering how many restrictions Wellington has had when it was just Wellington Council, and what sort of restrictions. And I don't think I can remember in the period I was on council for nearly 25 years in Dubbo. I can't remember Wellington having, if they had restrictions, a high level restrictions.
We had level 1 for about 2 weeks after the dam got down to 1.5%. In my time here, and I've been here for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
So
And that was back around 1999, early 2000s. I think it got down to around
millennium drought. Yes, they decided to do that, and there was probably no great need to do that because we had plenty of water resources. But I think it was seen to be.
And to put it in context, you talk about it being down. I think it got as low as 1.3 was the lowest that I remember it around that millennium drought time.
Yeah.
To put it in context, at the moment, as we speak now, the dam's at 3.9%.
Yeah, just below 4%.
Yeah, so it's still more than the millennium drought. Now, I went to a drought information session held by the state government just earlier this week, and there were a range of discussions, and that was one of the topics that was brought up. And certainly they said, yes, it has been worse. One of the things that they say at the moment that might be a little bit different about this drought is that it's more widespread than, say, the millennium drought was.
And a winter drought too. Autumn winter drought is where it started, and went over into a summer. So it is a pretty bad drought, no doubt about it. Yeah,
that's right. But I think the point is that we've been here before. We've had droughts before. We've worked out how to cope with them. The fact that we've got good bore infrastructure in Wellington and Dubbo, and people are still sinking bores now. So there is the water there. The availability is there, and we've still got water in the river. We've got 3.9% equates to just under 50 gigalitres of water in the dam. When we talk about Dubbo using 7 to 8 gigs a year, and we've got 4 gigs of underground licences as well as the 8 gigs from the river, 50 gigs is a reasonable chunk of water.
Yeah, and what we're saying, Tony, is within our release is we're not saying there shouldn't be restrictions, and there shouldn't be water savings.
We want good management. That's
what we want is good governance and good management, and follow the plan and use the trigger points within the plan. So as the trigger points come forward, the restrictions become heavier, but we're not at those trigger points, so they're jumping that far in front of where the community to positions that can damage the community before you have to get to the position that damages the community.
Yeah. We've just got a few messages now, and we'll be straight back. You've been listening to Tony Graham here doing an interview with Mathew Dickerson and Allan Smith, both former mayors of Dubbo Regional Council, and talking about the water situation and the restrictions and everything. It's been very enlightening, actually, and it's great that we get the right information out into the community. We stick to the facts, not opinions, and that we get some good decisions made in the finish about water management, and we need good water management.
Yeah, and what you said is critical, Tony. Using data, using facts, making decisions based around that, making decisions based around long-term planning and documentation from long-term planning. Not knee-jerk reactions, not opinions of people are making decisions on that, not something that feels right. It's got to be based on data and information.
Yeah, good opinions that if you manage a situation properly, it means that you can come out without any damage at all, really, and have good outcomes all round. That's what we want, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, and at the present time, like I said earlier, council has invested a lot of money in making sure that it is able to use its advantage. One of its advantages that it's had to try and get growth and attract business and attract services for the community is that it's been able to supply water. And that is important. You don't want the story to get out around the state, around Australia, that don't take your business to Dubbo because you can't get any water.
Yeah, that's really true. And thank you very much for coming along today, travelling all the way from Dubbo.
Our pleasure.
It's been great having you here in the studio, and hopefully we'll have you more. And of course, listen to on Tuesdays for Tech Talk, where we have Mathew come in and do 2 programs on the latest thing that's happening in technology.
We'll see you next Tuesday, Tony.
We look forward to that. You're listening to Binjang 91.5, and we've got a few important messages.